Minutes ago, it was declared that one of the icons in boxing, George Foreman, passed away a couple hours ago. On this day, Thursday, the 21st of March, 2025. And first of all, I want to express my condolences to the family. He passed away in Houston Hospital. George Foreman was not just a successful boxer, but he also had a successful business career, both in being able to uh, brand himself in such a tremendous way. You know, he attached his name to a very famous grill, the George Foreman Grill, which you see right here. And he had incredible success with that. Um, he's also known for many other things he put his name on, uh, branding himself. He was one of the, you know, first athletes to really brand himself. I mean, Michael Jordan did, but I mean, he found ways to brand himself and make himself relevant. Of course, he was also known as one of the commentary team on HBO boxing, famously commenting for Floyd Mayweather's fights early on in Floyd Mayweather's career when he was at Top Rank. And George Foreman was not just a great boxer, he was a great man. And he'll be tremendously missed in the boxing fraternity. I always thought that he's very supportive of up and coming boxers. You know, Jim Lampley and Larry Merchant may be very um, sarcastic and mean. George always had an interesting way of couching words. He and the other legend in the sport of boxing, Roy Jones Jr., you know. Of course, we're going to look at the legendary George Foreman's boxing career at this time. But I just want to, first of all, pay tribute to this great man. And his children, of course, are following in his legacy, not necessarily in boxing, but in other avenues of life. Even though for a short period of time, I believe one or two of them picked up boxing. George had his public personality was fantastic. You know, this man had a smile to light up a room, but boy, could that man fight. And what was so legendary about George Foreman's career is he had two careers. He had an early career where he faced the greats like Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier and you name them, he fought them. And they thought he was the second coming. You know, he was like the Mike Tyson of his day. Men feared to face him. I mean, his fight with Ron Lyle was just legendary. For those of you who've never seen that fight, go check it out on YouTube. Ron Lyle versus George Foreman. A legendary fight. The man was just strong like an ox. And of course, he lost to Muhammad Ali, and then I believe he either lost or he barely almost lost to Jimmy. I believe what was it? Jimmy Lyle. What was his name? I can't remember. I'll have a look in a minute. But this man was legendary. Okay, he was a legendary person all around. And while some people um have choice words to say about George Foreman. This man is the oldest heavyweight champion of the world. He still holds the record as being the oldest heavyweight champion of the world. On top of that, George Foreman had a second career in which he literally dominated a whole new set of era of boxers in the 90s. The 90s was a fiery career. There are few choice boxers he did not face in his career, but great fighters like Evander Holyfield said, the guy that hit him the hardest and the toughest fight he ever had in his life was against George Foreman. So let's talk a little bit about George Foreman's career. What an iconic man. Here he is when he wins the heavyweight championship of the world. I think he beat Michael Moore to become heavyweight champion of the world for, I believe it was the third time or fourth time. I can't remember. Great man. You know, never faced Mike Tyson. Never faced Lennox Lewis. I would have loved to see those two fights. But really, this man was a unicorn, because he was fighting outside of his prime, outside of his era. So he did something really, really phenomenal. And we're going to talk about him and pay tribute to him in this stream now. So let's get to it. Let's get to it. This is the early George Foreman. This is in 1973. Okay, how I'm going to do this is I'm not going to go through. I'm just going to go through the people he faced in his career. Okay. So George Foreman. George Foreman started fighting in 1969. He debuted in Madison Square Garden, New York City, New York, 1969. He fought a gentleman named Donald Walheim. That was his first fight. Knocked him out. And from thenceforth, he was just knocking out everybody left, right, and center. Here's a little exception to the rule here. Same year, 1969, October of that year, he fought Roberto Davia. And he beat him by unanimous decision. I don't know how many times he knocked him down, but that guy managed to make it all the way to the 8th round with him. And he just kept on a string of knockouts until he faced another guy named Levi Forte. And he was in his prime when he fought Levi. And Levi somehow managed to also make it to the final bell. And he just kept on knocking out everybody else. Oh, he faced another guy named Gregorio Peralta. He was not able to knock out that dude either. Okay. Now, the first consequential fight he had was against George Chuvalo. George Chuvalo would become, at least for a certain period of time, one of the top 10 heavyweights at the time in the heavyweight division. And he was able to stop George Chuvalo, who's a relatively tough guy, in the 3rd round of their fight. Okay? You can always go and look at these fights, by the way, on YouTube. He rematched Gregorio Peralta in 1971, and they were fighting for the vacant NABF heavyweight title, which is the next step is, the championship, the WBA championship. He fought Gregorio anyway, Peralta, and he stopped him in the 10th round of their 15-rounder. And he kept on knocking out other people. And finally, he got his chance at the championship. The undisputed champion at the time was Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier just come off of beating Muhammad Ali, if I'm not mistaken. And so at the age of 24 years, he became the undisputed lineal champion of the world. This fight took place in Kingston, Jamaica. Foreman versus Joe Frazier, Kingston, Jamaica. And in that fight, he knocked down Joe Frazier multiple times before the referee. Joe Frazier kept on getting up until the referee called off the fight in the 2nd round. Joe Frazier was the undisputed lineal champion of the world. And that's how George Foreman became world champion. He beat the man of the division after the man of the division had just beaten Muhammad Ali. So he beat an undefeated Joe Frazier. Let's put it that way. Okay. After that, he defended his title. He defended his title 2 times. The second time he defended his title was against Ken Norton. Now, when he faced Ken Norton, he had him out. He knocked out Ken Norton in 2 rounds. Now, what the thing about this is this. Muhammad Ali had fought Ken Norton. And Ken Norton had given Muhammad Ali a run for his money. You know, breaking Muhammad Ali's jaw in the process. And I can't remember if they gave the fight to Ken Norton or not, but Ken Norton had given Muhammad Ali a lot of problems. But when Ken Norton went up against George Foreman, George Foreman annihilated Ken Norton. I mean, annihilated him. So when it was said that Muhammad Ali would fight George Foreman for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world, everyone thought Muhammad Ali was going to get crushed. And the famous rope-a-dope, the famous fight in Zaire, Africa, very famous fight in 1974, the Rumble in the Jungle, where Muhammad Ali shockingly shocked the whole world yet a second time by knocking out George Foreman. It was amazing. And George Foreman didn't really fully recover from that loss. But, well, let's put it this way. After he fought Muhammad Ali, he went on to fight Ron Lyle in what was one of the incredible power-punching brawls you'll ever see. I mean, the amount of knockdowns that happened in that fight. And Foreman came out the victor. He finally knocked out Ron Lyle, but not before Ron Lyle had knocked him down. I believe it was 1 time or 2 times. I cannot remember. That was a firefight. And boy, was that incredible. Both guys had tremendous power. And they just kept on getting up. They get slept and they just keep on getting up. That was some wear and tear on George Foreman. Anyway, he won the vacant NABF title, so he's lining up to get a championship bout. He fought Joe Frazier again, dispatched Joe Frazier rather easily. And then he went on to face, not Jimmy Lyle, Jimmy Young. Jimmy Young. And Jimmy Young outboxed him. Jimmy Young did the Muhammad Ali on him and outboxed him. And Foreman pretty much after that retired. He retired after Jimmy Young beat him because Jimmy Young wasn't known as a power puncher or anything like that. He was an excellent boxer, though. And after Jimmy Young beat him, now he was already broken. I would tell you that he was broken since Muhammad Ali had beaten him. And George Foreman stayed away from boxing for 10 years. 10 years. He stayed away from boxing. And then we talk about his second career. His second career was different to his first career. He became a smarter boxer. He had to conserve his energy. He was an older guy. And he started off as usual in his knockout streak. And then he, because he was always a heavy hands, he managed to stop Dwight Muhammad Qawi, a legendary fighter, at light heavyweight or cruiserweight, sorry, a legendary cruiserweight fighter who moved up to heavyweight to take on Foreman, and Foreman stopped him in 7. And then in the year 1988, Mike Tyson's around. Foreman's making his way up the ladder. In 1989, he had a firefight with Bert Cooper. But, Foreman can take a punch, plus he has pretty good defense. And in the end, he actually retired Bert Cooper. Bert Cooper took so much damage, he couldn't see through his eyes. His both eyes were puffy, and they had to stop the fight. What an amazing fight that was. And Bert Cooper could give as good as he got. And he was able to retire Bert Cooper. He would then go on to face Jerry Cooney, who was a nemesis of Larry Holmes. Jerry Cooney was on a tearing down everybody, left, right, and center. And he stopped Jerry Cooney in 2 rounds. Now, you have to understand, this man's facing a whole new generation of fighters. He's in his early 40s, and he's fighting. This is back in 1990, by the way. He'd go on to face Evander Holyfield and give Evander Holyfield such a tough fight. So he got a title. Each got a chance for the WBA, WBC, and IBF heavyweight titles to be undisputed a second time. But in this case, Evander managed to survive George Foreman. The rounds where George Foreman had Evander in all kinds of trouble were very eventful rounds. But unfortunately for him, he was unable to capitalize on Evander Holyfield, and so he lost in his bid for the heavyweight title. He'd go on to face Jimmy Ellis, who was also a very good fighter, but of course, much older in age. This 2 veteran fighters duking it out was pretty interesting. He then go on to face a guy named Alex Stewart, who became world champion eventually, and he had a majority decision win over him. And then he'd go on to face Tommy Morrison. Tommy Morrison with that big left hook. But in this case, he almost knocked out Tommy Morrison. And Tommy Morrison was fighting for his life. It was for the vacant WBO heavyweight title. George Foreman, again, did not land that. He came up short because Tommy Morrison ended up still on his feet. But then he fought the very skilled. Michael Moore was just much more skilled than all of these other guys I just talked about. And Michael Moore beat Evander Holyfield, okay? And Michael Moore was beating George Foreman, but George Foreman, veteran as he was, sneaky as he was setting up Michael Moore for the shot he wanted to get him with, knocked him out in the 10th round, and became the WBA and IBF heavyweight champion of the world. The second time he became world champion. This was in 1994. 1994 was 17 years after he retired from the sport of boxing in 1977. What was also interesting about that was I believe it was about 20 years since he had won the heavyweight world championship. So I think it was 20 years after, which was just remarkable. And the man was etched in history from there on. He was the oldest. He is the oldest heavyweight champion to win the heavyweight title. 45 years old. He would go on to defend his heavyweight title against Axel Schultz, who was a good fighter as well. Won the vacant WBU heavyweight title. He was stripped of the WBA. He would go on to defend his titles successfully against a number of people, including Lou Savarese. Was he the lineal champion? I can't remember. I think they were saying he was fighting for the lineal title. Shannon Briggs technically beat George Foreman, but really George Foreman beat him. But I guess they said, he was too old and they wanted him to get out the game. So they passed the torch to Shannon Briggs, who became the lineal champion of the world on November 22nd, 1997. This guy, just looking at his boxing career with 81 fights, 76 wins, and 5 losses. And some of those losses, I gotta admit, you could have given him the fight. You know what I mean? One of them being against Shannon Briggs. Now, this man had only been knocked out once in his entire career, which means he had to have some kind of defense. It wasn't just that he was tough. And so much you can learn from George Foreman's career. Not just the persistence, because he had to attempt at the title 3 times before he won, the title. He had 3 shots at it, and I believe in the third shot, he won the title, a unified title at that, against a great champion in Michael Moore, and devastated Michael Moore's career because he outsmarted Michael Moore, just like how Muhammad Ali outsmarted him. And mind you, Michael Moore got stopped in the 10th round, where he got stopped in the 9th round against Muhammad Ali. So just some very interesting things there. But, experienced veteran, experience, that sort of thing makes a difference in boxing. And Michael Moore wasn't listening to Teddy Atlas enough and keeping his guard up. He kind of got too comfortable in there. So, from the perspective of boxing, George Foreman's career is incredible. He still holds the record for the oldest heavyweight champion of the world. And he's also one of the, if he's not the only one, he's one of the greatest fighters. His resume is ridiculous. When you look at who's on his resume, you have, and we're not just talking world champions, we're just talking Hall of Famers here, okay? Let's just talk Hall of Famers, right? Hall of Famers. Michael Moore hopefully will go into the Boxing Hall of Fame soon because he won the world title, I believe, at least 3 or 4 or 5 times, okay? And remember, he was also a light heavyweight, undisputed champion. So hopefully Michael Moore, and he was a light heavyweight champion, by the way, not cruiserweight. Okay, so Michael Moore may go into the Boxing Hall of Fame, but what I can tell you is Evander Holyfield is a Hall of Famer. He lost to Evander Holyfield, but still, Hall of Famer you're talking about right there. Another Hall of Famer is Dwight Muhammad Qawi, one of the greatest cruiserweights of all time. Okay, so you gotta pay attention to that. He'll be going into boxing. Going into the Boxing Hall of Fame, Joe Frazier, definitely, 100%. Muhammad Ali, definitely. Ken Norton, if he's not there already. He fought Joe Frazier twice, by the way. The only person to fight Joe Frazier more was Muhammad Ali. So I say all of this to say that you look at George Foreman's career, it's incredible. To fight a whole new generation of fighters when you should be on vacation. You're fighting beyond your duration or your capacity, right? This guy was fighting in his 40s, right? When he became world champion. Now, the oldest world champion in boxing, I think it's either Archie Moore or Bernard Hopkins. I think Bernard takes the cake on that because I think he was 49, almost 50 years of age, and he was still competing. I think Archie Moore is probably the next one. But the point I'm making anyway is George Foreman had a phenomenal career. Okay, phenomenal career. And after that, he had a very successful business branding things with his name. So he really built up a great legacy, and he'll be missed because the thing that George Foreman had, he always brings positivity to boxing. He would always talk about things in a positive way. And that spirit is now gone from us somewhat because he's gone. So anyway, I wanted to highlight just on the surface his career and the impact his career has had on so many people in boxing. I mean, most people will testify to you, if it ain't Ernie Schaefer's, George Foreman, or Ron Lyle, man, them guys used to hit hard. Like they hit hard, real hard as heavyweights. And because of their contributions to the sport of boxing, we've got that reverence for boxing. While some people say the heavyweight division is not as rich and as exciting as back then, everything that this heavyweight division is right now has to give credit to the great George Foreman. And some of the things that George has done will probably never be replicated in the sport of boxing ever again. We lost a great one, y'all. I just want to celebrate his life, his boxing life with you guys. I'm what you need. You guys have a great one.